Oh, it's always weird for me. It never like updates on my screen.
Oh, funny. I appreciate the warning. Let's see here. Let me pull up Twitter in the
I
feed
was
we're
doing the
about to start.
exact same thing. Open Cup in Portland. Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
And we're gonna click off of that because it's so bizarre looking at yourself.
Oh, is there like a chat window that you don't have to look at yourself?
Oh no, I mean like the delay on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I agree. Oh, here it is. I have to listen to myself for a sec.
There
Okay,
you
we're good. I have like an extra seat now that I got my new chair,
go. Nice.
and I can put my phone there so I don't hear the vibration here and there on accident.
I need to buy you a ring light. That's what I'm gonna get you for Christmas.
A what?
A ring light.
I have one.
The background on yours looks dark for some reason.
Yeah, it's because my wall's black.
Ah, I love. You can see the scarves. The scarves shine through though. I love that.
Yeah, I think I am still pretty dark. I don't know what to do about it. I have a pretty cheap ring light, so maybe that's the problem.
Me too. Me too.
Okay, you ready?
Ready when you are.
Hit record. Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy. You might be listening to us on the big 550 KTRS. Thank you so much for joining us in whatever way you might be listening to us or watching us. We are on YouTube. I've got Matt Baker here with me today. Matt, how's it going, man?
As always, Phil, great to be with you. Great to be doing this. We always talked in the off season how it was, sparse and here and there and trying to scrape news every once in a while. I really feel like this week we've stepped into the thick of things and it's fun. We've got 3 games in 8 days. It's a good time.
Yeah, this is when, like training becomes less often and the teams start playing game after game after game. And we as fans get to enjoy that. We're pretty lucky. But that also means we're going to be previewing and reviewing a lot more games. So we got a lot to fit in this episode, don't we?
A lot to talk about.
So we're going to start off with the Open Cup match, and we'll try to limit ourselves. Here at Flyover Footy, we love the Open Cup. So we'll do our best here. Matt, why don't you get us started with the lineup as usual, and we'll get talking about it.
Yeah, and we figured it would be a rotated lineup, 3 matches in 8 days. When you're at the time leading the Supporter Shield, you're in the top of the West. You're doing what expansion teams don't do in MLS, and so it makes sense to prioritize that competition as far as your first stringers go. So with the Open Cup against Union Omaha this past Tuesday, we ran out Ben Lunt in net. We had Selmir Pedro, Lucas Bartlett, Josh Yarrow, and Akil Watts on our back line. Miguel Perez and Indiana Vasilev in the midfield. Isak Jensen, Aziel Jackson, Tomas Ostrak, and Celio Pompeu kind of doing what they do in the attack, right? It's hard to pin down exactly what positions they were. Even Bradley Carnell alluded to it's hard to pin him down. He referred to 4 false 9s, 4 number 10s. I mean, they at any given time, they were just all over the place. And the closest I guess we came is Celio Pompeu referred to himself as number 9 on the right-hand side. So that was exciting to see that entire lineup full of some guys who have seen MLS minutes in Lucas Bartlett. Indiana Vasilev I called him in training the senior man on the team, which he kind of just he didn't take offense to it, but he was basically like, no, that's not me. That's not me. I guess in minutes, he acquiesced to that because he is the minutes leader this year. But, Josh Yarrow wore the captain's armband. Aziel Jackson had some time to shine, who had been seeing minutes with City 2. Tomas Ostrak back in the lineup. Celio Pompeu starting. A lot of exciting minutes for these guys. And boy, Phil, did they make the best of it.
They did, yeah, and I think this is what we should spend most of our time on, just because the lineup is kind of the story. The guys that got to play, like you mentioned, the guys that aren't always starting, and you have to mention that Klaus went out with a quad injury, and so if we ever thought he might play in this game at all, which I doubt anyway, that wasn't going to happen, obviously. Yep. And then the big news is that Sam Adeniran, I think we're going to touch on it later, but of course you have to talk about it here, that loan. This is the game of the year for me. Yep. The main game of the year that I would expect Sam to start and really get a chance to shine. And he wasn't available due to the loan. So, which he played in the Open Cup a day later for San Antonio, which is funny.
Cup tied to San Antonio.
But you mentioned it, having 4 false 9s, as Carnell put it, seriously or unseriously, that's what it was. And I loved seeing it without having a true number 9. I was really worried about this game because Omaha, like Union Omaha they play the spoilers every year in the Open Cup. They do really well in their own league, USL League One. And I was really worried not having a true 9. And I thought when we saw what this lineup might be, we were, I was like, man, who's going to play the 9? Who is going to do the hold up play? And two things that I noticed, I'm glad that it turned out to be 4 false nines just rotating like crazy, just going wherever they felt comfortable. And you saw there was some solidity in the way that they looked in defense, right? There was definitely a 4-4-2. You could tell who was supposed to be playing where. It looked like Ostrak and Celio were playing up top. So that was easy to figure out. But then once the attack happened, my goodness, Aziel Jackson especially was everywhere, even though he was playing that right wing. So anyway, it worked, right? The rotation was crazy. They really worked together well. They were able to let their quality shine, and that was really fun to see. And I'm glad that it went the way it did, because I was sincerely worried about Union Omaha, and clearly I was a little too worried, wasn't I?
Well, not to begin with, I think it was warranted, because you mentioned Klaus. We never expected Klaus to play. Once it became clear that this was going to be a rotated squad, you see Klaus having gone the full 90 for most of the games before this, Nico Gioacchini going the full 90 against Colorado. You know that they're not going to play, injury notwithstanding, right? So that's, this is going to be a Sam Adeniran starring match. And then the news came out that it was on Monday when we did the Open Cup presser with Bradley Carnell, where he said straight up, Sam's not going to be an option because they're respecting the process for the loan. And that took everybody by surprise, for good measure, because like you said, this is his game, ready-made, his opportunity to start, just like a Pedro, just like a Josh Yarrow, just like Isak Jensen. These guys who maybe they've come in for a few minutes here and there. Adeniran's only played 4 games and I believe 87 minutes for City, but no significant amount of time. This was his opportunity. So there was a lot of conversation between Monday and Tuesday about why would they loan him out when they have no strikers to really play with. People were talking about the Klaus injury, Gioacchini going 90, and I understood that to an extent, but the fact is this loan was in the works before the Colorado game. Yeah. It's not something that just developed in the last couple of hours before the transfer window deadline on Tuesday. I think it was Tuesday, might have been Monday night, but it was one of those things where they knew going into the Open Cup what their plan of action was. They knew they weren't going to have Adeniran. So it wasn't like they were caught off guard by having Klaus and Gioacchini unavailable, because I don't think they were ever intending to. They knew what they were doing going into this. And I think just like a lot of what we've seen in front office moves, in personnel moves, this organization knows what they're doing with their players. They know what they're doing.
They weren't worried at all about that 9, or else they wouldn't have let Sam go on loan like that.
Exactly. So any consternation about the depth at the striker position, I think, was alleviated entirely by this match. And you mentioned it, Union Omaha is not a pushover club, right? We talked on the Fallout show, Santi and me, about how they won USL League One a couple years ago, how they beat 2 MLS teams last year in the US Open Cup. So going against this team was a test to an extent. You could see it as kind of a trial run of, can this formation work? Can we roll out speedy, good ball handlers that can just run all over the place in Pompeu, Jackson, Ostrak, and Jensen? And can they make it work? And they did, and they did very well, obviously. But that, to me, more than anything, says we're going to be fine with Sam Adeniran going out on loan.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say we're going to be fine. There was one thing that I really loved in this game, and it was, Isak Jensen is not someone I've been gushing over this season, but, in this game, especially if you look at what we did in Colorado, like in the first half, I was like, if we just bomb it forward to Alm, who's being towered over by a defender every time we send it to him, and we lose the ball again, it was like the 10th or 12th time it happened in the game. I was like, stop banging your heads against the wall. What are we doing? And so I was getting frustrated. Yes, they could have sent it to Klaus, and they weren't always getting it to him. But I was like, if we don't have a true 9, this is what I was worried about. They're just going to keep sending it to the winger. He's going to get overpowered by these Union Omaha defenders, which is what they shine at. And we're not going to get the ball. We're not going to be able to progress the ball in this game. And it was really cool to have Isak Jensen, who is big for a winger, right? 6'1" or so, 180 pounds or more.
For a 19-year-old.
Right, exactly, that too. And he was able to be our target attacker. Yes, he's on the wing, but we were able to send the ball to him. And the thing that, I'm not saying we're cured, is that, Union Omaha left the 10 position wide open for the defense to send it into. So, we saw Jackson kind of cut in and kept the ball
All over
wide
the
open
place.
space because there were a lot of attackers behind him clearing the way for him. So everyone was doing their job, but I'm not sure that's going to happen in the future if we don't have, a Klaus in the next game. That's something to watch for in Portland, which I'm sure we'll get to. But Isak Jensen served his role perfectly. Perhaps we can talk quickly about Pedro. I wasn't terribly impressed about Pedro in this game.
Well, Carnell said about Jensen that he's one of the best forward defenders that we have. He referred
That
to him
too,
as
yes.
He referred to him as having a real ability to sense out and sniff a play and getting ahead of the game, being proactive in his mind, not just his body, and able to pounce and jump on a loose ball. So he's that guy you can send the ball up to, but he's also going to go into the duels. He's also going to put himself into physical positions to make sure that, and he was great with the ball at his feet too. There were so many
Yeah.
times where you could see he just wanted to beat defenders 1v1 or 1v2 in some ways. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but I'm glad he tried the entire time because he's one of those talented guys with the ball, and not just with his body, but with the ball. And on Pedro, I think Jensen bailed Pedro out a time or two. And Carnell didn't have negative things to say about Pedro. Coming into this, Pedro hadn't had a lot of minutes. He came in twice before this in late minute opportunities. He didn't, I would say, to call him a poor performance so far is too far.
I agree.
I don't think that's appropriate. But he hasn't stood out. But then again, up until this Open Cup match, he didn't have very many minutes. And Carnell's comments on Pedro is that he's a high level player. He has a good physical profile, good speed, great 1v1 defender. But Carnell was also very clear to say now it's his job, Carnell's, to get him going to those next levels. He called him a work in progress and says that Pedro is going to have a kind of a sales pitch to play for 90 minutes, and that's what he did. And now Carnell's talking about how Selmer's a guy that he needs to work with every single day to make sure that we know what the principles are being spoken about, that's committed to. He knows he's a great guy and he tries and he wants to work so hard and do what he can for the betterment of the team. All of that leading me to believe that he knows Pedro's not quite there yet. And so he knows the talent that's there. And I think this game highlighted a little how much of a work in progress he was. Whereas some of the other guys, like a Celio Pompeu, like an Akil Watts, or especially Indiana Vasilev, my goodness, the way that they were able to facilitate the ball up the field and take everything in the attacking third to the creative max was impressive from those guys. So you see a little bit of a separation from some of these guys in talent, where they are, and what their next steps are going to be.
Yeah, and I just want to say a couple things about Pedro. And these are, this isn't the whole story, because I think if someone was to watch Akil Watts for the first time, someone might say, man, that guy's not trying hard enough. Well, he's a smart player and he knows about positioning. So we've noticed that even though he doesn't look like he's running as hard as some of our other players on the team, he is still in the right place in most cases. So I'm not saying I'm right by saying what I'm about to say, but it is something. It's hard to watch me see Pedro, not out of a fault of his own or bad positioning per se, but a winger or an attacker is going to get by the left back from time to time. Yeah. And there were times when then Azil Jackson or Jensen was beating him back to his own position, trying to track back and defend. And that was hard for me to watch. And I'm not saying that that's damning. I just know that's, as a fan, it looks like he's not trying that hard. And I'm trying to figure out what that means in real life. So just something I've been watching for. But this was a perfect game for Pedro. If it means he just needs to get up to snuff, up to the right level, and he's still developing, fine with me. I think that's true for Jensen and a lot of other players that played in this game. And so I look forward to seeing more of that in the future.
And I know we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this match and the Open Cup in general in our wind down, but the last thing I really wanted to touch on is Edward Leuven in this game. So a lot of people were shocked after we went up 4-0 that Leuven came in at the 70th minute for Tomas Ostrak. And Carnell addressed this after the game, saying that Edu came to them, said he feels really good, he would like to play. So it's one you put in the bank and you go and get him on when they knew somebody like Johnny Nelson wasn't going to really get in, or Pedro was not coming out of the game. So they had an opportunity to bring in Leuven, who slotted right into that number 10 right in the midfield. And coming in at 4-0, Leuven, having played 90 minutes just about every single game, one of our key contributors, if not the biggest contributor, especially in the midfield. And with Klaus out, he's our only designated player on the field. There was, if there's any negative comment after the game from the fan base, I feel it was surrounding why would you bring in Leuven at that point and risk an injury? Stroud came in later on too, 6 minutes later, but it was Leuven everybody was kind of pointing to because Stroud has come out here and there, Leuven not so much. So I asked Carnell at the press conference on Thursday, what's the balance between a player comes to you and they said they're ready to go, they want to get in, but you as a coach have to maintain that fitness for a player for 3 games in 8 days and beyond. And he said that Carnell said it's a little bit of a feeling using the data and science and looking at how Edu's built as an athlete. He always wants to do everything. He's unhappy when I take him out. Carnell said it's his job to please the player and to listen to the science and all the aspects that go into that. So I loved how Carnell finished by saying he made a compromise with Leuven to go somewhere along the line. They made a compromise to give him 20 minutes of gameplay. Makes me think Leuven pushed to start that game. And the compromise was, no, absolutely not. We need to rest you. We're going to put you in for 20 minutes and give you a run out because that's the kind of competitive player you are. And I feel in that context, Leuven was smart enough with his gameplay. Putting him in at the 10 is a little more, it's less stressful in a way because you're not putting your body on the line for in the defensive half. You're able to do a little more creativity without trying to be physical. So it was about as protective as you can be with a guy like Leuven. And so that's kind of the background of why he entered the game.
It was funny to see him come in. You could tell that he wanted in.
Yes.
And, I would have done the same thing. So this isn't a critique or it's not a negative comment, but, since the game turned out the way it was, it would have been cool to have academy players to bring in. And Matt, I know you've gone into the roster rules for that. So we would have had to spend some roster capital in a way to put them into that game. And we didn't know it was going to be that close. Like I said, I was very much worried about losing this game. So I don't think I would have done anything differently. But, I definitely didn't want Nico in there, Joachini, because he's going to have to really put in a lot of minutes with Klaus out and with Sam out for that matter. And so I'm glad he didn't go in. I thought Leuven coming in and playing at the 10, Matt, you really crushed that. And it was just the last thing I'll say is that it was funny to see Leuven come in and immediately get the ball, almost immediately, because his positioning is so perfect. It was just, he was the guy to get it to, and he tried to cut back and pass at least 4 times before he finally got the ball in too good of a spot and scored a goal, almost too easy for a guy like him. So it was funny to see him come in at the 10. Yes, he wanted to play, but he clearly was trying to give the goals to other people before he got his own goal. It was funny to watch.
So 5-1, we beat Union Omaha in the 3rd round, move on to the 4th round. You ready to move on a little bit to the next topic?
Absolutely. Yeah. Go take it ahead.
All right. So this week, we had some good news actually after the Open Cup. No city injuries to report after the US Open Cup. So we're sitting at a healthy roster minus the aforementioned Klaus, who from previous timelines, as we're recording this on Thursday, has about 7 to 10 days from the initial estimate of 10 to 14. Jabulu Blom is still out for another 3 to 4 weeks. But good news on Blom today at practice, he was seen running around the field. So he's getting some action in where he had a groin injury, groin strain. So it's good to see him moving around, smiling. That was good, reassuring. And Joachim Nilsson is still out. No timeline beyond late May reevaluation. So that's great to not have any further injuries picked up from the Open Cup. And on the U.S. Open Cup front, today we found out that the next opponent for St. Louis City is going to be the Chicago Fire on May 9th at SeatGeek Stadium, which means that we will be traveling to Chicago for the Open Cup on the 9th and MLS competition on the 13th. Back-to-back away games at Chicago.
Is that their suburban field that they used to play at? Oh, so fun.
And they played their 3rd round match there too. So that seems to be their Open Cup home.
Okay.
They're gonna go there, come home, assumedly, and then go up to Soldier Field again on that Saturday. And we also found out that the League's Cup schedule is out. That's the other big scheduling news. And that's the tournament that's going to start in mid-July. We play the Columbus Crew and Club America in our group stage. And the Columbus Crew game, I believe, is a 7 o'clock Central start, but the Club America game, our home game, is a 9 o'clock Central start on a Thursday in July. So that one's going to be a little rough time-wise, but it's not a bad way to beat the heat. I'll say that.
Exactly. I was with Stu. Stewart had a perfect timeline where he was like 9 o'clock. What the heck? And I think Brian Simpson, of course, with the practical mind that he
Yeah.
has was that it would be good for the Heat. And he's right. He's right.
Good for
I'm
the
good with
Heat
this.
and kids, at least it's in the summer, so the opportunity is there if you wanna stretch them out a little bit. I don't know if I will, but
And one last newsworthy thing, you were mentioning injuries there, and Manuel Vates kind of hinted that perhaps Klaus won't be out the full 10 to 14 days. Now,
crossing our
I'm sure the
fingers.
club would never announce that kind of thing, but
Of course not.
Manuel has a way of being right from time to time here, so
And
that's
Klaus
something to
was
watch.
seen at practice this week smiling, walking around, so
Good.
let's hope because, it's the Nico Gioacchini show until then.
Yeah, yeah. Which I mean, will play out. That'll be fun in its own way, but we all love ourselves some Klaus.
Yep. And so if you're joining us right now, we're Flyover Footy on the Big 550 KTRS talking about the US Open Cup, and we're getting ready to pivot into our Portland Timbers preview. But before we do, real quick plug, after our main show on KTRS and the first 45 for our pod, we're going to be digging deep this week into the transfer of Sam Adeniran. We're going to go into a deeper Open Cup dive, and City has some front office news, hiring former City Football Group executive who has been with Man City, Diego Gilini, as the president and GM. And I probably butchered the name, but that's what happens when you hire somebody from Europe like that. President and GM, and so we're going to dig into that after the show, as well as look at some MLS expansion and relocation rumors. So stick around on our podcast feed for that one. And Phil, let's dig into Portland.
Yeah, it's the first rematch of the year for sure. The second time we've played Portland, but it's not going to be the same Portland that we saw
Nope.
before at all. So I know you want to talk about some of the injuries that aren't there anymore, or perhaps you want to start with some more City stuff first.
Yeah, I mean, it's Carnell hit the nail on the head about kind of referring to him as a rejuvenated Portland, and it's when we played Portland the first time, it was kind of the name recognition was what was driving them. The first game we played was on March 11th, so this is, like you said, the first rematch of the year. It's not like we're having much space at all. City won that game 2-1, goals by Stroud and Hebert. We played a 4-2-3-1 using Edward Leuven in the number 10 position a lot. But Portland's team was mostly without a guy like Evander. So one of their highest record level signing, their number 10 at the time. We'll talk about it. He's kind of positioned himself as a second striker, so to speak, lately. But he was recovering. They had some injuries during the game. It was just more or less a depleted Timbers team at the time. And so there was a lot. It was one of those games where early on in City's season, it was, oh, you beat the Timbers, but they were without all these players. I think they were without Blanco. I think they were without one of the Charas. I think Yimi Chara actually went out with an injury in that game. So they had a lot of players who are historic Timbers players out. And that was one of the games where, oh, well, City wouldn't have won or wouldn't have had a good time in Portland if it weren't for these injuries. So this is an opportunity to face a much stronger team. And we're going to get into the few injuries that they have in a little bit. But going into this game, St. Louis still sits first place in the West. We're third in the Supporter Shield. We have 19 points with a 6-2-1 record, 3-1-0 at home, and have league leading 21 goals and 11 goal differential. While Portland comes into this game 10th in the West with just 8 points and a 2-5-2 record. They are 0-4-1 on the road. They have no wins on the road yet. That's going to be key to remember. They only have 11 goals on the season and a -4 goal differential. It's important to know, too, as part of those 11 goals, 4 of those goals were scored against Seattle at home on April 15th. They've had 1 game with 2 goals, 5 games with 1 goal, and 2 games they've been shut out. So this is a team that, aside from that outburst against Seattle at home, they haven't really done much on the scoreboard.
Yeah, it's really interesting what Portland's been like this year. And, I was really worried about them being, we saw them before Minnesota. So they were kind of the first defensive team that likes to counter. And I was really worried about it. I thought they were going to be the first team to do to us what Colorado did to us in the last game. So it didn't happen. Like I said, they did have people out, but I just watched the game with who did Portland play last week? I'm blanking right now. I just watched it.
Portland's last game was against FC Cincinnati.
Thank you. I saw them play Cincinnati. It was a 2-1 loss. I mean, they had their chances and they looked pretty good, but they looked like a really similar team to what we saw. And so, am I confident? Yes. But can things go wrong? We saw last week that absolutely playing a team like this, things can go wrong. So,
well, it's funny because the power rankings have us at 4 and Portland at 23. But the interesting thing is in the descriptions about both of them, road games are hard was mentioned for both teams. As we played away at Colorado, they played away against FC Cincinnati. but there's a difference in outcome. Road games are hard, yet
Your
Roman
your
Berkey.
stat last week was amazing. All the teams that played
Oh yeah,
away. Yeah.
there was only 3 teams total that had results who were away last week. Only one team won, got all 3 points. That was DC United. We were one of the other 2 teams to actually come away with a point. So winning on the road in MLS is hard.
Yeah.
It's unusually hard, especially in comparison to the rest of the world. It's one of the hardest leagues. We always tout the parity. Road games are difficult for MLS, and whether you want to uh, blame it or attribute it to the fans and the noise, or if you want to attribute it to the travel and the just all of that plays into it, be my guest to do whatever you want. It's just the sheer fact that road games in MLS are hard.
Yeah.
And coming away with a point against Colorado, whereas they weren't able to come away with any points against FC Cincinnati.
Yeah, the other comp I've seen a lot is it was everyone during those Champions League home and away knockout rounds. Everyone's like, well, it's so hard to play away. And you see these MLS guys come out with these stats about how much harder it is to play away in MLS versus Champions League. And so it's just to put it into perspective for you Euro snobs, I might say. Yeah, that's it's a good way to look at it. It's pretty tough.
Yeah, and both teams are also coming off of midweek matches, but both teams also rotated heavily. We rotated, I think, all but Indiana Vasilev essentially from our starting lineup. They rotated all but 2 players. They had one returning player into their starting lineup who left early. Sebastian Blanco returned for Portland, but other than that, they should be at pretty much full strength, just like we should be for our starting 11 at least. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting stylistic match too. We've talked in the past about how St. Louis has the most direct speed to their attack. They have the second fewest passes per sequence. That all has remained the same. We talk about that. It fluctuates just a little bit as far as the top few teams, but St. Louis has really started to separate themselves as a very, very direct team and very few passes per sequence because we move the ball up so efficiently and so quickly. Along with that, though, there comes some weaknesses too that in St. Louis has regularly been weak against counterattacks. We've been weak against through balls. We're obviously not a possession-oriented team, and we do love the long ball. So offensively, we attack down the right-hand side a whole lot. We attempt crosses a lot. We take a lot of shots when we're on our game, and we're aggressive. Those are a lot of our styles of play, a lot of our strengths, and some of our weaknesses that we're taking into Portland. But, Bradley Carnell had some interesting things to say about Portland's style, and I think it lends well to what the data says as well.
Here's a quote from Carnell in that.
Each team has a structure and each team has difference makers and character traits, right? So we try and observe and analyze the different formational tweaks that they do when they have certain players in and when they have certain players out. And yeah, for me, obviously their right-hand side is very, very dangerous with Mosquera bombing down the right-hand side. So, is he a right back or is he a right winger? He's everything. So that's very, very important.
And one of the things that we love to do is find out with that kind of comment, where does a guy like Mosquera play? So Juan Mosquera has started 6 games as a right back for the Timbers, and he started 3 games as a right winger. He's a guy like, if you picture what Celio Pompeu can do for St. Louis, but as one of the key contributors for Portland. He's their second highest rated player in the season. Mosquera has an assist and 2 goals. He's one of their leading goal scorers with 2. He's a guy that their offense runs through. And if you look at any stylistic sheet for Portland, if you look at any ways in which they play their game, they play directly through their right side an awful lot. They attack down that right side. They attempt through balls often. So Mosquera is a guy to keep an eye on as one of the showrunners to their entire offense. And it really is interesting to me the way that Carnell describes that as somewhat of a personnel shift. So depending on who's on the field, and they've clearly taken a lot of looks at who will be available and what kind of a shape they're expecting to see from Portland. We know that Portland is good at coming back from losing positions. We know they're good at counterattacks. They're good at protecting the lead. So if they gain a lead like they did against Seattle, they're not going to lose it. They're one of those teams that even on the road like to bunker down. And they play similar to St. Louis. So they're 6th in direct passing, 4th fewest passes per sequence. So I mentioned St. Louis being top of the league in those 2 ways that you move the ball. Portland's right there with them. They're not as hardcore as St. Louis is in some of those aspects, but they play a very similar style where they're looking to possess the ball 45% of the time. They're looking to do what St. Louis did. These are the things we talked about too earlier in the season in that first match to see whose kind of style would win out. And with the personnel that Portland gave in the first match, I think it's easy to say St. Louis won out, but it's going to be a very different game as far as that goes. I think knowing that Mosquera is going to be out there is something that Carnell and team are going to be focusing on.
Yeah, and they got a couple players back. I think Spria is someone who is just like a dangerous player. He's so physical, and he's got the quality to finish. Not every time, but I mean, he'll put in a really good shot here and there. And so I know he's going to be back, and he was out last time. And he's talking about Mosquera and comparing him to Barrial, and like
Yes.
I agree with you, Matt. Like those guys, Carnell compared him to those guys, and like they're just such veteran type players that they're not going to mess up. They're not going to make a huge mistake. And I think when we play Portland, I think making sure, I'm worried about them in the same way as Colorado. They're similar to Minnesota, where it's kind of easy to underestimate how good they actually are and how solid they are in a game because they don't look flashy, but they can get a lead. They're veteran players. They know how to attack. They know how to come back. They know how to hold a lead. And so, yes, protect against those counterattacks in this game. St. Louis, we can't let them do what Colorado did to us last week.
Right.
And the other one is just like limit the mistakes, because Portland knows, how to play a really clean game. And the way that we play, mistakes are going to happen. It's just part of the deal. And so just like limiting those would be really good. But part of our playing style, we'll take the mistakes if we get a few more chances on goal, right?
I always find it fascinating when I'm looking up information on how teams play and stats, and especially the narratives driven from stats to see what teams' weaknesses and strengths are. And some of the things that we just talked about match up really well for both teams in some regards. So St. Louis is characterized as being weak defensively against through balls. Portland is very strong in playing through balls, and that's a way that I think they could be trying to carve up our midfield. So knowing what our formation is going to be, I think will be very important in how effective they are in the midfield. So the midfield, that right-hand side, the way they're able to make some of those long passes is going to be important. But on the flip side, Portland is weak at defending set pieces, and that is historically so far a very big strength of St. Louis City, whether it's Edward Leuven or Indy Vasilev. They can take set piece shots. They're successful at corners. Like, we are a good set piece driven team. Part of it is we have a dedicated coach for set pieces, and the amount of time we dedicate to training on those has borne fruit so far in this early season. And that's going to be one of my keys to the game I mentioned later, is we have to be effective in those set pieces. And I think the other thing is going to be, we can't possess the ball too much. We still need to do what we're going to do with Nico Gioacchini up front. So that's going to be interesting for me to see, is how is Gioacchini's style of play going to be different when he moves up, and some of the personnel on Portland. So one of the so we mentioned injuries for St. Louis. We have 3 players who are out, but they're known. We haven't had any injuries this week. Portland had guys like Claudio Bravo, Yimi Chara. They both missed FC Cincinnati, but they're both expected to play with no limitations against St. Louis. They traveled. They're expected to play. They're not on the injury report. Whereas a guy like Sebastian Blanco, he returned against Orange County in the U.S. Open Cup. He's also available. They're getting a lot of these guys back, like Carnell alluded to, but they still have a couple out. Claudio Bravo, I mentioned earlier, he's still listed as questionable, so he's traveling. He's expected to play, still questionable. Eric Williamson, to me, is the big one. He was lost to a knee injury a few weeks ago for the season, and that changes their shape entirely without him in the midfield. You mentioned Dairon Asprilla. He's on the injured list as well. He's been downgraded to questionable.
Sorry.
That was just in the last couple of hours.
Okay.
Yeah, his knee is why he's listed on the questionable report. So it'll be interesting to see if he's on minutes restriction, if he starts, how they manage him, because just like Mosquera, Asprilla is their leading goal scorer. 2 goals. He's their top rated player regularly throughout the season. He's one of the guys who drives just about everything they're going to do. And if they don't have him available, it's going to be a huge blow. I think Evander is the other obvious guy to watch out for.
Oh, yeah.
He took a while to kind of get up to speed on things. And he hasn't had a lot of success creatively, but I think Carnell had a pretty good breakdown of the players and kind of where he sees them from today's press conference.
And Evander, like, he's the one that got hurt early in the game. And so that's another thing that went wrong in that game is that they had a game plan. Evander had to be one of the main parts of it. He's one of the highest paid players on the team, if I'm not mistaken. And
and that
that's
first
another
game
one to look for in this next one, because he'll be in.
It is. In the first game, he wasn't supposed to be. He was recovering, if you remember from the first game.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't supposed to be in for more than 30 minutes. And that injury to Yimi Chara forced him to be in for 60. He wasn't fit. He wasn't ready to go. No. And so that changed their entire style.
No, I don't think Yimi Chara didn't come out in that game. So I think you are confusing him with Evander. I know he wasn't supposed to play a full game, but he came out in the 12th minute. Evander did.
Oh.
I'm not seeing Yimi Chara coming out. I think Yimi might have been out for this game as well.
Well, there you go.
Yimi was out as well.
Yimi was out.
So he's in, but I was going to say that too, though, because if he's been injured, that also explains why he hasn't been effective. And just like, who knows when he's going to start figuring things out. I hope not against St. Louis.
Well, Evander's thing is he needs somebody to be his recipient, right? The number 10, he's creative with the ball. In Portland, the fact that they have two goal scorers, two players with 2 goals leading their team shows the ineffectiveness of who he has to distribute the ball to. And with him stepping up recently as their second striker, as opposed to more of a midfield role, that's going to further change their shape and change how they push the ball forward.
Yeah. And you've got some XG stats that kind of explain that perfectly, if you want to lead right into that.
Yeah, so St. Louis and Portland so on the flip side, when we're talking about XGA, expected goals allowed, it's interesting that St. Louis and Portland are tied with the most expected goals allowed, meaning that, hey, this is probably going to be a high-scoring game. But on XG, St. Louis has 12.6 XG overall, expected goals, Portland with 9.5. So they're not a high goal-scoring team in general. Like, it's not just the fact that they have low goals scored overall, but they're not producing a lot of offense to put themselves in good positions to be able to score goals. And when you look at how teams are leveraging their XG to what they're really doing, St. Louis has highly overperformed their expected goals. So the shots that St. Louis is getting off, they're being very clinical in their ability to finish when you look at the overall big picture, whereas Portland is doing what they're expected to be doing, essentially. I like this stat that's a goal difference minus expected goal difference. And it's really like, are you overperforming, or are you doing about what the stats say you should be doing, or are you underperforming? Whereas like Sporting Kansas City is like -10 in this stat, where they're highly underperforming what they should be doing. St. Louis is at a 12.9 in this, meaning the higher the number, the more overperforming you are against your expected goals. Portland's right there at a 1. So they're doing exactly what they should be doing with the players they have on the pitch. They're just not getting themselves into good spaces. And I think that's another key for St. Louis is Tim Parker, Kyle Hebert. They have to defend, and they have to make sure that a guy like Evander has no space to work, and he can't get through, and they're not getting in good positions, whether it's from a cross, whether it's from a through ball, to be able to finish on Berkey.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say is we don't want to rely on Berkey like we did against Colorado. Yes. Team of the week was really awesome for Berkey, but we don't want to give him that too often.
No.
You are listening to Flyover Footy. We're on the big 550 KTRS. So thank you so much for joining us today. We got a few more things to talk about before we do our predictions in this one. Matt, where would you like to go next?
Well, let's look at some of the other players. So one thing I like to do is make sure that everybody knows who they're watching and kind of the numbers for them. So it seems a little silly sometimes, but just the key players to watch out for Portland. We mentioned Evander. He's number 20. He's their record DP signing from Michelin. He used to play as the 10, or usually does, but he's been their second striker lately. Dairon Asprilla, number 27, is a forward who we mentioned is questionable, but is also their leading goal scorer. Sebastian Blanco, number 10 midfielder, one of their more creative guys, just returning from injury as well. And he shouldn't have, if he plays, he probably will have more than a 30-minute restriction, meaning he played 34 against Union or against Orange County. And so he's expected to play more than that. Claudio Bravo, number 5 defender. He's on the injury list as well. Diego Chara, Yimi Chara. Yimi Chara is the designated player. I've mentioned that he was injured, he was injured earlier in the season, and both of those are midfielders. Juan Mosquera is number 29 to watch out for. He's tied for lead in the goals, like I mentioned. And Zach McGraw is another guy to watch out for. Zach McGraw is really interesting to me. Number 18 for them as a defender. He is one of the more aggressive guys on their team. And I believe he might be right at that line of a yellow card suspension. He has 4 yellow cards in the season. He almost got himself one taken away because of good behavior, whereas you go 5 games without a yellow card and you get one taken off. MLS, you're suspended for a game if you have 5 yellow cards accumulated. He has 4, and he got a yellow card last week, which would have been his 5th game without one. So he's one of their more aggressive defenders, but he's also riding that line. And that's a tough line to ride, because if he gets a yellow, he's out for their next game in MLS. We also, so pivoting real quick, we also have a similar concern. Where
one thing about McGraw real quick, he scored the goal against us.
Yes.
It was 2-1. He was the one that scored. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
Yes. Header in the box, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep. So on the yellow card accumulation front, one other thing to watch out for is Tim Parker and Jared Stroud are both toeing that line of one more yellow card, and they're going to have a 1-game suspension and a nominal fee they have to pay MLS. It's almost comical, $250 fine. But it's that one suspension. And so if they miss or if they get a yellow card, I was talking with Ty Keogh today, because why not name drop a guy like Ty Keogh? And he was saying how if they're going to get a yellow card, they know to get a proper yellow card. So they're not going to get one for dissension. They're going to get one when and if it matters in the game. But otherwise, Carnell had said there's no real coaching to that. You can't coach a guy like Tim Parker to say, hey, be a little less aggressive and don't get a yellow. Parker's going to do what Parker's going to do. Stroud's going to do what Stroud's going to do. And to do anything otherwise would be a fundamental change to the way that they play. And I think that would be a detriment to City. So let them do what they're going to do. If it happens, it'll happen as they see fit. I'm sure they'll be professional with what they do. So yeah, all 3 of those players, Zach McGraw, Jared Stroud, and Tim Parker, are kind of on yellow card watch, so to speak.
You mentioned that 5 games without for good behavior. I mean, I don't see Stroud going 5 games without a yellow card. I just don't see it. Parker, I could for sure, but
Stroud seems like it's just a matter of time, right?
Yeah.
You got to pick your time, and it's picking your time in the game, but also picking your time in who you might be suspended for, right? So knowing, are you going to be without him for Chicago, for Kansas City, for one of these other teams, and how that's going to play into the tactical approach. So all those things are going to be interesting to see, more than likely when it happens for Stroud.
Absolutely. Well, let's do our formations and predictions for the game. Why don't you get us started, Matt?
Yeah, I'll get it started. So Carnell kind of alluded to a little bit. So he said today that it's likely he'll move Gioacchini up 1, meaning he's going to be that pure number 9. He mentioned the flexibility of the group to play many different positions, saying we'll have to see who we put at the 10. We have 1 or 2 plans. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I don't see it any other way than a 4-2-3-1. I'm going to go with Nelson, Hebert, Parker, Nerwinski in the back line, Indiana Vassilev, Miguel Perez in that defensive midfield. And then I'm going to say we're going to start with Jared Stroud, Edward Leuven, and Rasmus Alm up front. Leuven, the last time he started, I believe, in the 10 was against Portland. So I see us going with that again, and then Nico Gioacchini up front.
Interesting. I am going to say not the same. I think we're going to have Vassilev and Leuven as the pivots, and I think Ostrak will be the 10, and then I think Alm and Stroud will play on the wings, just because I think we're playing at home, and so I want to see a little more attack than Leuven. I want a little extra oomph with Ostrak at the 10 rather than Leuven just being up there with 2 defensive guys.
Oh, we're gonna have a conversation about Ostrak here in the wind down, and it's gonna be a good one. But that conversation is why I don't think Ostrak is gonna play, or at least start in this game. And I think Leuven provides some flexibility too. So if we're kind of thinner in our defensive midfield, right? And in the sense of the only other player is Akil Watts, maybe Aziel Jackson. But I see a substitution scenario of shifting Leuven back for Vassilev, who's played a lot the past couple of games, or Perez. So Leuven could shift back, and then you could slide in an Ostrak. You could slide in an Aziel Jackson if he wants to play. So there's options to move Leuven back, whereas I think we might start him at the 10.
Okay, yeah, and the reason I said that I thought it might be Leuven and Vassilev is I think Leuven can play a full 90, no problem in this one. Vassilev and Perez would be nice to kind of trade on that. They put in a heavy shift in that last game, but we'll talk more about that in the wind down. Like Matt said earlier, we have a full podcast. We're not used to being so short-winded with 45 minutes here, which we're creeping up on. So please do check out our podcast if you'd like. It's on every platform now. We just made some upgrades, so you can find us practically anywhere. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, as well as any podcast platform. So please check us out there. Matt, do you want to do predictions before we go on the score?
And we also added a new show. So if you're not familiar, we've added a Flyover Fallout that comes out every Tuesday morning now, where we recap the previous weekend's matches. So we've got it all. We've got shows that give you a recap, shows that preview, give you the news, everything you need. And for this match that you're about to watch, if you're listening to this on Saturday on the Big 550 KTRS or listening to it on our podcast on Saturday, I think it's going to be a high-scoring 4-2 affair with St. Louis winning.
I'm just going to say a repeat of 2-1. I do think it'll be more intense, but let's see if Portland can defend a little better away from home. Or
trying to have faith in my stats that both teams are defensively vulnerable a little bit, and it's going to be a shootout.
You had me questioning with that one, but I'm going to stick to my guns on that one, which is not very accurate. It's starting to prove I'm not good at guessing these sort of things. So maybe listen to Matt. Like Matt said, this is Flyover Footy. It's the Big 550 KTRS. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We will be chatting with you next week. Twice. Come back and listen, y'all. Bye-bye.
Go City.
We're out.
Not bad. I'm going to correct both of us on the wind down because Evander did come in early in that game.
Did I have it backward?
He came in for Christian Paredes.
You're right. I'm sorry. Son of a gun. But we were both
I was wrong on the Yimi Chara thing. I don't know why I threw out that name, but I was wrong on that.
Gosh,
but I am gonna say I'm gonna correct it for
sure.
Evander.
You have to.
I was totally wrong on the Yimi Chara. I don't know why I mentioned him twice. I mentioned him twice, and I know I don't even think he played in that game.
No, he didn't. That's what I was kind of saying. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't want to just leave it.
You didn't want me to
correct us.
Yeah, you didn't want me to get away with that.
I tried to be kind, even though I got it wrong.
Diego Chara played in that game. He played the whole time too.
I know, and I thought he was out in that game because I was like, man, Diego just wasn't there, but he was.
Yeah, that was
handled him
like the knee injury for Paredes, and it was real bad looking. He was out for a while. He was down
back
for a while.
Huh?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean he was down on the ground?
He was down on the ground for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'll be right
back. I
hate
that I got that wrong.
I think we have to open with that then.
Oh, for sure. I'm gonna hit record and we're just gonna go right into it.
Okay.
Welcome everyone to the wind down. We're gonna open this one with a correction. I tried to correct Matt's mistake, and by doing that, I made an even worse mistake. So in this case, would you say, Matt, that two wrongs are able to make a right once we get to the wind down? Is that what's about to happen?
Yeah, I think we're okay.
I always think about the Reliant K title. Did you ever listen to that band?
Yes.
Two wrongs don't make a right, but four do. Or two lefts don't make a right, but four do.
Yeah. So let's keep it going. And I like how on that one we were kind of trying to one up each other a little bit because we were half right. I think we were both half right in that, where the actual thing that happened is that Christian Paredes left 12 minutes into the last match, City Portland, and Evander came in, where he was only supposed to play prescribed 30 minutes because he was still recovering in that game, but he ended up going 60 and he wasn't fully fit for it. So I had wrong who he was going to sub, who he subbed in for, and Phil had wrong that he subbed in.
Yeah, I had that he came out.
So again, like you and I are like two sides of the same coin, always have this opposite thing going. And we either balance each other out or we have half the story that we can bring together.
I agree. Let's start with a question. Jonathan Himmelberg just asked, do they have a timeline for Nilsson yet? When he eventually comes back, who do you think he'll replace in the starting lineup?
So Bradley Carnell's been very cagey about, maybe cagey is not the right term, but he's been evasive about answering that question directly. Last week, I asked him, or it was asked, I think it was either myself or Tom Timmerman, about the timeline. And all he said is ask the medical staff, which of course we can't ask the medical staff, is being facetious in that.
Mm.
But the last time we heard information, it was that he'll be reevaluated in late May. And we've seen him do individual drills the past few weeks at training. He's not participated in team activities. But last week, Carnell said that the work he was doing running, because he's recovering from knee surgery, the work he's doing running, he now does not need to have weights assisting him. So he's back to running with his full body weight, which is fantastic for structural on your knee. It's a great sign that he's on time, I would hope, for his recovery. But that late May is not he's going to be back by late May. He'll be reevaluated in late May. So that's the only time it's been said. So I just want to be very careful not to get people's hopes up that he might see an appearance in May. I'm more thinking realistically that Leagues Cup in July might be a decent time that he comes back. Maybe see some minutes here and there beforehand if he's on track. But May, I would not look to see him on the field.
Yeah, we've talked about before that Leagues Cup is a perfect time to kind of reintroduce him and get him up to speed, and then decide whether he's a full-time player. I think the biggest thing that we haven't talked about is like that stat came out about Hebert this week that he's first in all of MLS in 50-50 duels. That is massive. So if Nielsen comes back, he's going to have to really impress, in my opinion, to get Hebert off the field, or they're going to have to find minutes by using 3 center backs, perhaps, is something we've talked about in the past, which would be so much fun to see with adding Nielsen into that lineup. But, these are all things that we have to consider. And, most importantly, Carnell's going to have to figure out how to get those guys minutes. It's a good problem.
Yeah, and so Jonathan followed up about a comment that they made on the City Voice, which the City Voice is the club's podcast where they do interviews with the players, and Peter Wood does that. And he did mention quite a while, but that Nielsen also mentioned that there were 2 home games that he saw. So I believe they recorded that in late March after the San Jose game. So could put the timeline similar. So it's not too far off now, but at the time it was. And I think I would expect to see something similar when he does come back. I keep going back and forth of maybe we do shift into a back 5. Maybe we do have 3 center backs. Maybe, because how do you sit Kyle Hebert at this point, right? Yeah. Especially knowing that our back line is so rarely subbed in. Those are the 4 guys who see a bulk of the minutes. Nelson and Hebert. Nelson is the only guy who consistently gets subbed out, but only after a couple minutes, after a few games. That's the most. Nerwinski's at one point had played the most minutes besides Berkey. Parker has only missed time for the injury, his groin injury, and Hebert's only missed time because of Canadian national team duty. Mm-hmm. So we don't sub our back line. If you plug Nielsen in with Parker and you have Hebert go to the bench, Hebert's not going to see time. So how do you handle that? And maybe a long run in the Open Cup is the answer. Maybe a long run in Leagues Cup is the answer. There are competitions to leverage here. But the other option is 3 center backs using probably Nelson and Nerwinski as wing backs, but then you have 1 less attacker. And unless you're going to see a commitment to train with that formation regularly, I worry that it will have the same result as we did against Seattle, where there wasn't really anything to our attack and we were having trouble getting the ball into dangerous positions.
Well, you talked about it, and what you guys mentioned, I think it was in the Cincinnati Fallout episode, or maybe it was this last one, about how Carnell says that they're well-versed in the 3 center back, formation. And you guys said some negative things about it after that, but my main point here is that I don't think he's going to shy away from it by the sound of his comments. So.
No, and we saw for the first time a willingness to go move to a 5-man or 3 center back line as opposed to starting the game. So it's clearly a formation that they favor in certain scenarios.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the answer. Maybe it's a little more fluid of a situation with those 3. But we're also assuming that all 3 are going to remain on the team for the entire season. They're completely unfounded right now, but there's speculation of what would happen if we moved Hebert during the summer transfer window. His stock is rising steadily, but and then the only reason that his name comes up is because you have Parker signed to this big money deal. He's your vice captain. Nielsen is almost uniformly thought of as he has the potential to be the best center back in MLS, coming from um, Wolfsburg and playing with the Swedish national team actively. So he's in his prime, and so it's hard to say either one of those guys could. Well, it's really hard to say either would be moved. I don't think that's in the question at all. But it's even harder to say they'll see anything but in the starting lineup.
From Bielefeld, Rasmus Alm came from Elfsborg, so that's exactly what you did there. But
there you go.
Or I'm wrong, and that's another second mistake.
Nope,
but
you're right. You had that one right. Had my Swedes mixed up.
Yeah, I love the idea. I mean, as much as I love this man, Hebert being sold to a Canadian MLS team, like I've been calling it all year, and I would be shocked if that didn't happen sooner than later. If not before the end of the season, like I think in the winter transfer window.
There are roster rules that make it valuable for Canadian teams to have Canadian players, and Lutz would be smart to take advantage of that if the opportunity presented itself, and we could be properly compensated for that.
With that stat, I think someone mentioned that Hebert needs to be starting over Victoria for Canada, and the Gold Cup, we could see it. We could absolutely see it. So
why not?
Why not? Phil Murphy asked, noticed Sebastian Blanco played in the Open Cup game Wednesday. Do you think he travels and plays with St. Louis City? Yep. What do you think, Matt? You think yes?
He was photographed boarding the plane.
Oh, there you go. Well done. Look at that.
There were 3 players who were, and let's see. So Bravo and Yimi Chara were photographed together, I think. Blanco returned against Orange County, and so he's not even listed on the injury report. So all 3 of those players, I think we may see, Claudio Bravo being the most likely not to be seen.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me as well. I was trying to look. Oh, it's not on there, so never mind. I did want to say too that before we get too far, Nielsen did do another City voice. It just dropped 15 hours ago, actually.
Yeah, that was the one I mentioned.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said it was a while ago.
I'm fairly certain it was recorded a while ago because in the comments he made of that pod, which just dropped, he mentioned 2 home games so far.
Okay.
And so that was. I try to look for those because I know they do these interviews periodically. They don't release them timely only because they're not trying to break news. These are feature pieces on players and feature pieces on staff. So they record them and then they bottle them and then they release them periodically. They're not meant to break news. So I like to try to piece together when they're actually recorded.
Yeah. But check out the City voice if you haven't listened. I mean, it's really, Peter Wood is like, man, he's really good interviewer. And I don't usually like club produced podcasts, but my goodness, that one's too good not to listen to.
No, it's so good for what it is because it gives that insight into players and it doesn't try to speculate on things. It doesn't try to spin a narrative of a news story that's out there. It doesn't try to do PR stuff for the club. It really gets into feature pieces on players.
Maybe one more question, maybe more will come, but for now, Lou Boys SC on Twitter asked which player benefits the most from Klaus's injury. Pardon me. Any City 2 players impressing you?
Yeah, that was an interesting question I saw.
No City 2 players are impressing me. I'm sorry to say, but
you can't really argue anything
Glover
else.
Is on the up and up, and we haven't seen him much with City 2, so I'm really curious about Caden Glover getting a chance as maybe a sub in the next 3 games.
Mackay Joyner's looked good. But there's a difference between, I mean, there's some that have looked good. Michael Wenzel's looked good on the back line.
You're right.
But there's a difference between these players and how they're looking good versus anybody that might be remotely ready for a call up or remotely ready for a signing. And I don't think anybody's there yet.
Even Vollmer's looked good as well, actually.
Vollmer has looked good, yes. In both center back and fullback positions.
Yep.
And Aaron Hurd's got some time with City 2, although not as much time again as I would have expected. But so no on the City 2 front. And on the Caden Glover front, Carnell had mentioned last week in comments before the Open Cup that he is still recovering and still progressing from his injury that he had at the end of preseason, beginning of this season. And he's getting time with City 2 now, and he's going to get in the fold with the first team. What that looks like, whether it's fighting for a game day roster, being there on the game day roster as kind of the backup striker. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I think he has more recovery and more time on the field before we can actually say if he's somebody and by that time, Klaus will be back. So from taking it back to the question, not even Glover's going to benefit from Klaus being out. I think the answer is probably going to be one of our central midfielders, to be quite honest, because I and this is going to dovetail, if you're okay with it, into Tomas Ostrak and some of the Open Cup stuff, because my starting lineup that I picked out there was purposefully putting 3 attacking midfielders with Leuven in the middle, because I like all 3 of Leuven, Vasilev, and Perez being on the field. And when you don't have Klaus and you don't have Sam Adeniran and you don't have Caden Glover, your option up front is Nico Gioacchini. If Gioacchini's healthy right now, he's starting, and I haven't seen any inkling that he will be starting up front with anybody else other than Klaus, like thinking of Ostrak or Pompeu. I think it's Gioacchini. So if Gioacchini's up front, somebody else in the midfield has to take that Klaus spot.
Yeah, and I would actually say too that I beat this to death, but I think this is a chance for Ostrak, who hasn't been. I mean, he has a goal, he's looked good in spurts, but he hasn't been, a nail-on starter. This is his chance to get more starts and really take a step forward in MLS. I want to see him get at least 1 goal in the next 2 games if I'm him, or an assist even. I think would be good.
Ostrak, you mean?
Ostrak, yeah.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have if we have 1 striker, the starting striker, then we need a 10 in most cases. And if it's not Leuven, it's Ostrak, in my opinion. So, I mean, unless Ozil has impressed enough to take that spot, which is possible.
Let's talk about those 2, because in the Open Cup, Aziel Jackson is the guy who got all the accolades, man of the match, 2 goals. But in the first half, we were talking in our group chat that he looked wild out there. He had some real quick runs, and he looked a little, he didn't have great ball control. He looked a little like he was trying to create space for himself and losing the ball, or just being a little too anxious, I guess is a good way to say it. Ostrak, I thought, couldn't connect his pass as well. I did not think Ostrak was, his timing just was not in sync to me with a lot of the other players. And he was clearly trying to facilitate. He was trying to be the number 10. He was not trying to do an Aziel Jackson. He was not trying to be like Celio Pompeu and go for goal. He was trying to facilitate for other players. He wasn't able to find space, I thought. He wasn't able to connect to lead. Oftentimes I saw at least 2 or 3 passes where he would try to lead a player, and the player either didn't move. I think Pompeu was one of them, where Ostrak thought he was going one way and he just wasn't. So there's miscommunication. And there was just a little bit of space that Ostrak put between his passes and where the player was, so that it was a contested ball. And I know Ostrak, especially with Alm healthy now, has not seen as many minutes as we probably thought he was going to early. So it's possible that form is just an issue right now with more or less decreased minutes. And he's kind of the guy who comes in for Alm or as a sub later in the game. I don't know. I thought the Open Cup was an opportunity for certain players to highlight themselves. And Carnell said today in the press conference that players made cases for themselves on Tuesday. And at first I'm thinking, oh, did they come to him and say, oh, I'm ready to go, coach. I know I can do this. No, he meant their performances on Tuesday in the Open Cup. Guys, like, I'm sure he was referring to Indiana Vasilev, Aziel Jackson, Celio Pompeu, those kind of guys. I just don't think he was referring to Tomas Ostrak as a guy who made a good case for himself.
So I want to defend him a little bit, and I hate that it's coming from me because I clearly sound really biased at this point. But I think when we talked about earlier it being 4 false nines, and it was a chance for people to make a name for themselves, I agree with everything you said about Aziel Jackson, and that I think he saw this as a game for him to really make a name for himself. And I think that's why he looked wild. I think he was, I mean, defensively, the man was all over the place, but also offensively, he would come back so far to get that ball at times. And that's just how he plays. It doesn't matter what game he's playing. When he played us with Minnesota, he was doing it too. He just played his game, and it looks frantic and it's crazy, and he puts a lot of effort and he covers a lot of ground, and he has the shiftiness that Aziel has, or sorry, that Celio has, and that was his game. He was playing against a tier 3 team in the US pyramid, and he was able to really look good in that game, as did Celio, in my opinion. But he went after this game, and I think he squeezed other players out by just going all over the place. And I think Ostrak, who was supposed to be playing a false nine striker role, he was, one of the two higher attackers. I think he was being responsible and staying high, which is what is needed if other guys are going to shine underneath like that. So that's my only defense in Ostrak. But I do agree that he gets lost in games a lot. And so I think it would be really helpful for us to hear if Ostrak is really valuable. Like, it's hard for us, I think, to see if he's valuable, what it looks like, and whether that's positionally, defensively, passing. I'm curious what Carnell would say about that if we were just sitting on a couch together and we were like, what about Ostrak? And I guarantee we could list a number of things that he likes about what Ostrak's doing.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm not sure what he would say about it negatively either. I'm just kind of curious,
well,
about what my eyes are missing.
Yeah, and that'd be a fruitless endeavor just because I think what he said about Pedro in his post-game comments is about as close as he's ever going to come to a negative comment about a player. And it's not a negative comment. It's a constructive comment. And that if there was anything to say about Ostrak, I think it would be that. It would be working on his, like, what he can work on or work that he would work with him type of a thing. Ostrak also has a lot of versatility too. He's played all across it. He's one of those guys that we talked about at the beginning of the season that he can be on the field so much because he can play all three of those attacking positions. You mentioned we mentioned he's doing that false nine with Celio as at least in a defensive shape, the front two.
Yeah.
But he's played on the left side when Stroud has played on the right side. He's played on the right side when Jensen or Stroud has played on the left. He's played in the middle when Alm's been in the game. There's lots of options that you have with Ostrak on the field. So I don't think it's a sense of he doesn't have a space or he doesn't have a spot with the other players like Rasmus Alm. When Rasmus Alm is healthy, I think he's our right mid, and that's where we are right now. But that just means that Ostrak has an opportunity in the middle or he has an opportunity on the left. And when it comes to going all the way back to the Lou Boys question of who benefits from Klaus being out, Ostrak could be a guy. Like, maybe I'm being too harsh on what I saw in the Open Cup, and Carnell actually wants to see Ostrak on the field more. Whether it happens at the beginning of a game or in the middle, if Klaus isn't there up top and Gioacchini is, we're in a 4-2-3-1 more than likely. And that gives Ostrak options in the middle or on the left, assuming Rasmus Alm's in. So he's a guy who, even if he doesn't start, he's going to see time every single game, I think. Because we mentioned all the time that we sub our attackers. We sub our attackers way more than we do our defenders. And that just means that guys like Jensen, now that he's gotten into form from his ankle injury, Jensen, Ostrak, Aziel Jackson, who we talked about and made a case for himself, those guys are going to be some of the ones who are able to come in for a Rasmus Alm, for a Jared Stroud, and even maybe an Indiana Vasilev to see a lot of minutes. So with one striker, those are the guys who are going to benefit.
Yeah, just quickly, Aziel and Celio are my two favorite super subs as far as like the lower end guys that come in at the end of a game. I just love seeing those guys go crazy at the end of the game. So that's my vote. But everything you said, Matt, I wouldn't hate any of that either. So.
And on the formation, I think it's interesting that we've played 9 games in MLS and we've gone. You remember how early we were in the 4-2-3-1 early in the season? It was almost like every other game, 4-2-3-1 on the away games, 4-4-2 at home. I think that's what it was. And it's shifted with Klaus in. We've played 6 games in a 4-4-2. We've only played 2, those first and third games or second and fourth in a 4-2-3-1. So getting back to that, I think is going to be interesting with Gioacchini up top.
It was so, you have to remember too that Gioacchini kind of had a knock in the beginning of the season. And so I think we all assumed from City 2 that 4-2-3-1 is just like the City formation. And we found out later that they were very open to playing 4-4-2 with Gioacchini, and he really cemented his role because he did so well. It was very clear that Gioacchini needed to start after a couple of games of full fitness. So, yeah, it's interesting now, though. Like you said, Klaus is out, so now we got to maybe go back to that 4-2-3-1.
And we want to see more of Gioacchini because outside chance, as however you ballpark it or bet it, that he's still in contention for a national team spot, and he knows it and he wants it. He won't talk too much about it because that's not his personality. But you could tell that he wants to get back in there, and this is as much of a chance for him as it is for anybody else. So players in the midfield, I think, can benefit from Klaus being out as far as minutes, but this is your opportunity to be the goal scorer. It's Nico Gioacchini.
Yeah, and you know he's going to be itching to get some more goals under his belt.
Yeah.
He's gonna want a lot this season so that he can get into that national team conversation, and I hope it starts working for him. We got a couple really big ones we need to hit, and I think that's going to be our only two things to talk about if I'm right here. Let's talk about Sam Adeniran. We talked about how this would have been a perfect Open Cup match for him, but that he got that loan to San Antonio. How'd you feel about that, Matt? Or do you want to talk about the details of the move in
No,
general?
I was surprised, and we found out just by me asking Bradley Carnell about Sam Adeniran and Caden Glover and their availability for the Open Cup, knowing coming right off the heels of the Klaus injury and Joaquini going 90 minutes in Colorado, and to hear both of them being kind of summarily shut down for various reasons, it was shocking at that point to hear that they were respecting the process of Sam being loaned out, because we know that he hadn't I mentioned earlier 87 or so minutes, 4 appearances. He's been kind of like a Selmer Pedro in the sense that he just hasn't had the opportunity, even though he had a lot of promise coming as a goal scorer from the USL Championship last year, being on loan to San Antonio. He's been on loan to, I think, Louisville.
I don't think so, actually. He was at San Antonio last year.
He was on loan to another USL side. Well, he played for Tacoma too. That's right.
That's what I was going to say.
So he's had a lot of success there. So this is his natural progression, right? You're successful there, and you would expect that for the low value we paid Seattle for his rights, this is a no-brainer to bring him on and develop him and keep him going. I think he's like 24. He's 24 years old. But the thing with strikers is Nico Gioacchini said pretty clearly a few weeks ago, the striker mentality. And that's pervasive in strikers. And you have to have that edge to you and that desire and the consistency. And so if you don't have the consistency, you're not going to be in form and you're not going to be the best version of yourself. And that seems like what happened with Sam Adeniran. The opportunity wasn't there. But the interesting thing on the opportunity is we talked a few weeks ago about the striker position being seemingly a shallow position because of our 4-4-2 formation. And so that's the thing that surprised me the most is it's not that Klaus was injured and we did this because the move was in progress before that. It's that Caden Glover's not there yet. And Klaus and Gioacchini are in a 4-4-2 are strikers. So if you take one out and you don't have Sam Adeniran, you're basically saying we're changing shape. We don't have the depth to go straight to a 4-4-2. But the Open Cup kind of changed my mind a little bit. And so the two things I'll say before I let you speak on this is that Lutz mentioned Sam will get valuable minutes and a chance to continue his professional growth in a competitive league at the USL level. So that tells me that they want him to get more minutes and they want him to be a consistent contributor for a team. Assuming they bring him back because he's not on like a Klaus or a Leuven multi-year deal. I think that they're just hoping that he will continue to grow and have a spot to come back to. At the same time, the Open Cup showed me that we do have a lot more options up front than I think anybody really considered in Celio Pompeu front and center, but also possibly Aziel Jackson, depending on how our shape looks. And I don't know, the domination that we had against Union Omaha really had me thinking that the world is bigger than just Klaus, Gioacchini, Adeniran.
It is, yeah. And I'm just curious if maybe this is making room for someone, in addition to everything you just said, Matt. But, you know, I just like to say some eye test things to back up with some stats on Sam. I think he did a really good job in every way except goals, except for scoring. And, you know, he had 8 shots, 2 were on target. We saw a couple, I don't remember which game that was that we were really trying to catch up at the end of the game. I think it was the Minnesota game he came on.
Yeah.
And Klaus had worked so hard on that wing, got the ball, and Sam did such a good job getting into a good position, receiving the ball, bodying the guy off, and then just like really messing up the finish. Couple other sitters or couple other headers that really should have been on target, and they just weren't. And so I think he's very close. I just want to say, because those are semi-negative things, that we've given him 4 games to play in. He's gotten 87 minutes. With Seattle, he's only gotten 72 in 2022, 59 in 2021. And so similar minutes to last season with Seattle Sounders, but in that amount of time, he got 1 shot off under Seattle, but he's gotten 8 shots with St. Louis and 2 of them on target. That's a good trend, right? Like we're getting him the ball more often. He's gotten shots on target and he's gotten shots. Maybe he just needs some more seasoning, and I hope San Antonio helps him, but I think he needs time on the top tier to get better. So I'm curious how this plays out. I'm curious what City is thinking. Maybe they're going to bring in another striker because I don't know if we plan on going the rest of the season with 2 strikers. We can call him back. That's another thing, is that we can call Sam back if we want. I just like it's a bit of a head scratcher of a move. And I don't doubt the team. Look at what they did in the Open Cup. Like we said, their plan worked and they planned on not having another striker in that game, and it was fine. So it's just interesting if Klaus goes down again or if Nico goes down again. Like, what's the plan, guys?
Yeah, and 30 of his 87 or so minutes came against Minnesota, and that was the game where he had that sitter from Klaus, and he had 4 shots. So of his total shots, 4 came against Minnesota. So that was his time to shine, and beyond that, it's just the opportunity hasn't been there. I do agree that 9 games is a small sample size, and just because he hasn't had the opportunity yet, Klaus just went down with an injury. These things happen. And I would have thought that not a loan, but some opportunity with City 2 would have been more of a thought than loaning him to USL, because that's a more permanent move. It's not a sense like we can recall him. That was a part of the deal, is that we can recall him from loan. But you know what I mean? Like if you wanted him to get minutes, if you wanted him to get opportunity to play, like City 2 exists down there. And I guess I would have thought that City 2 would have been used more for that. Like it's being used with AZL Jackson. He's gotten time with City 2 down to grow and develop. And we saw what he did with City on the Open Cup. I guess I would have thought that Sam Adeniran would have been a player like that, where you let him rock at City 2 for a little bit to get his form and stay sharp. But that it doesn't seem like for some of our players that is, even Pedro to an extent. Like if he's not going to get time with City, why not let him cook in City 2?
Yeah.
But we haven't leveraged those kinds of players. I guess I'll call them at this point fringe players with City 2. It's been more focused on growing and developing the academy players or the UPSL players and some of the direct signings to City 2. But I guess I don't know. I guess that makes sense in that regard, why we'd loan him out. Yeah. I don't know. It is a bit of a head scratcher because at least for it's the end of April now. So at least for another 2+ months, this is who we're riding with. Summer transfer window doesn't open until July. So even if a Bobby Firmino appears somehow in St. Louis, that's still 2.5 months of 2 strikers, assuming both are healthy.
Jonathan Himmelberg definitely said, yeah, making room for Firmino. I wish. Yeah, that'd be great.
The other note on Firmino is that we have now 3 open roster slots and we have 2 open international slots, which we would need 1 of each for Firmino. And money aside, that I would expect almost, I would bet some money on this one that we're going to sign somebody in the summer transfer window. At what position it is, from what country, I don't know. But I would bet anybody any amount of money that we make at least 1 signing in the summer transfer window.
Oh, yeah. I think so, too. Do you think we make a striker signing? I think that's pretty specific.
I would bet a lesser amount of money on that one. But I would probably still bet an amount of money.
More because of this Sam loan, though. You know what I mean? I'm still not quite getting it. Unless, this is the last thing I want to say about it, is that maybe Caden Glover has earned a lot of minutes. So maybe he becomes a regular player like a Miggy Perez, who's basically our 3rd midfielder right now.
Yeah.
Could Caden Glover be that 3rd striker? And maybe the answer is yes. Because
why not?
The thing that bothers me, Caden is pretty tall, I think. The thing that bothers me is how often, I was saying how we send the ball to Alm over and over and over. And it drives me crazy if he's not able to bring that ball down. Nico's not much better. Now, he does make a few moves in the game to really send someone forward and break out. Even though he's short and small, he's able to figure it out from time to time. but it really helps having a Klaus. And, I think Sam would have served that purpose, even if he wasn't perfect at it. Can Glover do that? I feel like we need at least one big person in our upper lineup. And I may be wrong about that, but that bothers me a little bit.
The thing to watch for me in the next few games is going to be how well Nico Gioacchini does further up. So we heard Bradley Carnell say straight up that Gioacchini's taking that move, like he's going to be used in the Klaus role.
Yeah.
Gioacchini's been very successful at both distribution and goal scoring when he's been able to play underneath sometime, either underneath or next to, but not the guy up top. So having that role, I think his ability to distribute is similar to Klaus. And so that's going to be pretty consistent. But the positioning, I think, is the thing for me is with Alm and Stroud, presumably on the wide sides, like is Gioacchini going to find the correct amount of space that deep where it's at a position from where he's been playing the past few games. So that's the interesting thing for me to watch. But with the Klaus, like we talk about it now because it's pertinent, but Portland and Dallas are likely the two games that Klaus misses. It is a pretty, if he progresses as we think he is and hopes to, should be back by the second Fire game on the 13th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's how long we have to think about, not a stopgap necessarily, because I think we have the offensive depth to cover.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I just think Nico's going to need a lot of support. He likes to play, he likes to play off of people. And so he's the second striker, that's his most comfortable position. He can definitely finish, but as long as he's got support, I think we're going to be just fine. So I think, if Ostrak starts, he's going to have to really play a big role in that regard. We know our wingers can help in that. But it also makes me think about your shout about Leuven at the 10. He might be the best support Nico could ask for up top, looking at how he positioned himself as a 10 in the Open Cup game. He was really good.
And Rasmus Alm, I don't think we've talked about him enough in just how effective he's been in the attacking third when he's been on. He's been in great form lately, and he's going to provide a lot of assistance to Gioacchini up top, and to the point where Manuel Veth mentioned him as a possible option at striker, or at least high up the field. And so knowing that he has that finishing capability is going to add to what Gioacchini can do. They're not going to, I think, truly be together up top, but I think you're going to see a lot of playing off each other for Gioacchini and Alm.
Yeah, I love what you guys said about Alm. That when he got that goal, I think it was like the fallout for Cincinnati or something.
Yeah,
you guys were talking about Alm, and Santiago said his vision really is good, and he's so good on the counterattack, and he doesn't get caught up in the counterattack itself. He keeps his head on a swivel. He's looking for the pass, and he's willing to shoot as well. He's so good at progressing the ball on a counterattack. He's awesome. He's really good.
He had that side heel pass, remember, in transition against Cincinnati to Gioacchini.
It was my favorite. Yeah.
It was so
Loved
pretty.
it.
And like the timing that he had to have to make that work, that's the exact kind of play that I think gives you a lot of excitement to see more of Alm and Gioacchini play off each other.
That was his first chance to show some finesse, because he's been a lot of speed and dribbling and shooting and passing, but that was very nice.
Well, and for Alm, Carnell talked a week or two ago about when he came back. I think when he played against Cincinnati, or maybe even the match before, it was not physical with him because he had recovered. It was mental. You need to get in there. You need to have experience and trust yourself and the confidence. He has that now. He was one of the players that was in the interview room today, and you could see just the excitement to go in and do whatever is needed and to be just a part of the system. And I think he's in the type of form that we need, given Klaus being out.
That's a Lutz find. He's a perfect piece for this team, so that's really awesome. Yep. We got one more piece of news we got to finish here before we go, and that is the former City Football Group executive with Manchester City, Diego Giuliani. I'm going to say Giuliani was hired as the president and GM for St. Louis City, which is a role that Carolyn Kindle was filling before this. And Matt, I think this was a massive surprise to everyone, wasn't it? It was to me.
Oh, for sure. And so this morning, we're recording this on Thursday night. This morning, Tom Bogert from The Athletic now, and some other reports broke that Giuliani was being named the president and GM. And I think the GM part is what throws everybody off
Yes.
because
Americans especially, right?
yes. So the immediate knee-jerk reaction from the report or from the leak from the anonymous source that Bogert had is that nothing's changing currently with Lutz and that Giuliani is going to be coming to City this summer after his duties with Man City wrap in this season. So you start to go into panic mode, right? Seeing a new GM, president GM come on in a few months. So you could see, oh my gosh, this is succession planning. They're giving him a runway to take for Lutz to hand this off. And so that's what happened before the club released their statement. So naturally, that's where all the thought process was going. The club statement, though, really makes it seem like it's more of filling a role that Carolyn Kindle herself had been doing. I almost said replacing, but that's not really the right thing. So Carolyn had been the CEO and president of the club. She took on the president role. And if you remember, like if you look at other clubs, the president role is pretty all encompassing and can include some direct oversight of the sporting department. I know that I want to say Garth Lagerwey had a president role with either Seattle, maybe Atlanta now, but in addition to like a sporting director, somebody, but they're like that role, president, does have some usual oversight to the sporting department. A GM role absolutely has oversight into sporting departments. And so when they announced his roles, saying that as president and GM, he's going to report directly to Carolyn Kindle, who now will only hold the chief executive officer role with City. Giuliani's managing his day-to-day is going to be he's managing all day-to-day operations of the club across the sporting, revenue, marketing, experience, operations, administration, and community departments. This is pretty extensive to kind of all of the heavy hitters that City has been involved in. So you're talking about areas from what Dennis Moore used to do as the kind of the chief revenue officer. You're taking the revenue, you're taking the marketing group, you're taking Seebeck's experience, Matt Seebeck's chief experience officer, assumedly being reporting to Giuliani. You're taking the operations of the stadium, the game day, you're taking it admin and all the community outreach departments. That's the club, right? And so day to day of all of that. But the first thing I mentioned is sporting. So while, yes, the club has specifically stated that this is not any part of a succession plan, that Lutz is remaining, has no plans to leave, that they've like, this is like an opportunity to see proof in the pudding, right? So I have never seen the club say one thing specifically and do another in this way. And so I don't have any reason to believe that now is any different. And I also don't really have any reason to believe that Lutz is going to suddenly pivot and move away from any plan or thought that he had when he first signed. I still think we have at least a few years left of Lutz, even if he's looking or receiving offers from other clubs or countries, because he's a hot commodity. We both know that. Like they're seeing what he's doing. And the last thing I'll say is I think there's going to be it's one of those organizational kind of, they're going to have to figure it out as they go, where Giuliani might have like revenue related oversight to the sporting department. You know what I mean? Like if Lutz wants to go and spend X amount of money on a transfer fee or sign a player, sign a U22 or something, maybe he goes to Giuliani and that's what the sporting oversight includes. I don't know. All I know is that as a fan, I'm still fully expecting Lutz to be on board for the foreseeable future, for his role in scouting, developing, identifying, signing, and really managing the sporting department to be entirely unchanged.
Yeah. And I think, I hope I'm not over repeating what you said, because you kind of said this, Matt, but I think
I say too much.
Well, no, I just like if an American hears the term GM, we think of Mozeliak, right? And his former role is, yeah, thank you. And as the Cardinals GM, that was a sporting role, right?
Yep.
And so we think about that and we're like, wait, my first thought was, oh God, where's Lutz going? What's happening? And, just from people I've been able to talk to, that's not something to worry about short term. Like, I think Lutz is still like on board. Nothing's going to change there. But that was our first thought, is like, is he going to take a role, or is he there to kind of take the roles or take the reins from Lutz because he might be a hot commodity around the world? He might have a chance to leave, and he might see an offer that's too good to refuse. But I think, my main thought there is that, yes, Carolyn Kindle is in charge 100%, but you've felt like you hear Lutz say something like, this is an initiative that's very important to us and to me. And it's something like, the urban initiatives to try to bring in everyone to play for free at a young age, the Futures program, and all these things that he's doing. And then on top of that, like the style of play that he's able to, go after, and the players, the kind of players, the designated team thing kind of makes a lot of sense. So we hear Lutz say something publicly, and then we see it happen in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're able to see that Lutz is able to say something and then get it done in real life as fans. And we don't know what that looks like behind the scenes, but Carolyn Kindle did not get in his way, to her absolute credit.
Oh yeah.
And because clearly the guy's doing a great job. And so, my initial worry was like, is this Giuliani going to get in the way? I don't know. He still could, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to say that he is. The league's, the club said in the release that Lutz isn't losing any of his responsibilities. He's not cutting into it. And from what I've heard, that's true. That I don't think they're worried about that.
Right.
But it is still another cook in the kitchen. You know what I mean? That's just as like a casual fan kind of comment. Like, he's still there, and Lutz may have an idea, and if Giuliani gets in the way, I'd hate to see that if it's something that's been working so far without him around. But the last thing I'll say is that Carolyn Kindle's focusing on long-term projects now too, and so that's another change, is that she's still around. She's going to have like overall vision kind of stuff, and then we'll just see how Giuliani plays out in the future, mixing with Lutz. And I'm not too worried about it. The club has been so good, and I know that's what you're gonna kind of finish with here, Matt, because like the club hasn't made any missteps, and there's no reason for us not to trust them, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I'm listening to you and hearing myself talk about what our knee-jerk reactions were and what we're looking at. I tend to think that we're being a little too narrow in our view of what this is.
Never.
But I reread the press release that they put out, and so Giuliani came from City Football Group, working with Manchester City on a lot of relationships with their international football clubs in the EU, Latin America. He was on the board of directors and worked directly with club CEOs and sporting directors to set targets, provide direction, yada, 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 corporate speak. Everything that all these quotes from Carolyn Kindle, from Giuliani, they relate to, and I'll say one from Carolyn Kindle here. After a long and extensive search, we look forward to welcoming him to one of the best sports cities in America as we continue to grow our reach and leverage soccer's popularity to increase interest in everything St. Louis has to offer. She talks about how his incredible amount of international soccer experience will help take them to the next step in their ambitious journey to become a global soccer brand. And then his quote relates to, it was evident the club is deeply committed to leveraging the power of the sport to positively impact this region, but also mentioning how you look at soccer's continued growth in the U.S., MLS new partnership with Apple, the World Cup coming. It's undoubtedly a unique and special time to come back to the U.S., and he mentions growing St. Louis City SC's reputation. So all of that, like the global aspect to me, is where this is really going to come through. Like, we know the ambitions of this ownership group to not only be the perfect community neighbor and to improve our community, but to help put St. Louis on the map. This is the ownership group has roots in that STL Made initiative as well. And all of the marketing that goes into touting St. Louis on a global level. This hire speaks more to that than it does any involvement in the sporting department, the more I think about it. I think pulling all of these pieces together, using his connections, and being able to, with the World Cup coming to the U.S. in 2026, put St. Louis on a map like never before, and kind of taking what we talk about as America's first soccer capital and being a soccer city, and just blowing that up in proportions that we haven't really ever considered. And so whether it's marketing or whether it's opportunities to partner with clubs or to be visible on a global level, I just think this should be viewed more as like the first or a next step in that conversation and that evolution than it should be about his involvement in signing players or doing what Lutz is doing.
So well said, Matt. I love that. And, we always say things individually, but as a podcast, I think we fall perfectly somewhere between, I think, what we just said. I just love that I think you nailed it there. We're going to close out with that because it was a mic drop comment there, Matt. Really well done. To finish, I forgot to say that I'm having this second shift Brewligans.
Hey, that's a good one.
This is one of the best IPAs I've ever had. I think they used to do a double IPA, and I was a little scared to try it because one of those will knock me out. I'm a little guy. But man, this is amazing. They
have
so
those at
good.
City Park too.
Oh, I didn't know that. We're in the markets or
Yep. Yeah, the markets.
I'll have to
the markets at the supporter section, they have them.
Okay. It might become a mainstay for me. Just wanted to kind of throw that out there. Luligans do a lot of things right, and no exceptions here with this one. All right, that's it from us, me and Matt Baker here. In a couple of days, you're gonna hear Matt again on a Flyover Fallout, another review of hopefully a Portland win against Portland, rather. Hopefully. So thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
See ya.
All right, man.
Good stuff.
I love that. You did that last comment was so good.
I don't know what it was. Like the more the day went on, the more I kept